Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to Game Talk, wherein I play some computer games and talk about them from a game development perspective. I'm David Stark. I make a game called Airships Conquer the Skies, but that's not particularly relevant just this moment because we're going to play Dwarf Fortress. If you don't know what Dwarf Fortress is, you are living under a rock, but I shall show you. Ta-da! This is Dwarf Fortress. It's a incredibly intricate text-based strategy game where you manage a fortress full of dwarves. It is pretty hard to get into, but it's incredibly influential. If you've played any RimWorld or Prison Architect or Nermaria or Towns or any of those other games where you basically build some kind of thing, some kind of town or fortress or something like that, even Minecraft, then in a sense you're playing a game that was derived from Dwarf Fortress. In a certain sense, this is, well, not quite the original, but it's hugely influential. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this, and I'm going to play it the kind of hardcore way without any tile sets. So it's just going to be a whole bunch of different symbols. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to create a world for dwarves to play in. Okay, yes, closing Twitch. Good idea. Right. Yeah, so Dwarf Fortress is made by Bay 12 Games, which is basically these two guys called Zach and Tom Adams. It's free, but you can support it, as I do a bit, through Patreon, and you should. So we're going to make a really quite small world with a short history, just because we want the world generation to not take forever. You can see all of the, there's no mouse stuff really, the mouse is just going to sit here in the corner. All of this stuff is basically handled with arrow keys, with the numerical keypad, which you desperately need in order to not go mad, and like enter and various completely random keys like Y is go here. I don't know why it's not, say, G. No one knows. So first observation, the user interface in Dwarf Fortress is not only retro, it's kind of random. Let us generate this world. We are creating Tethordon, the destined domain. So the game basically simulates an entire world, and then once it's simulated that for a while, it presents it to you to play in. So we're going to play in the destined domain. So why is Dwarf Fortress important? Well, Dwarf Fortress is a classic in a particular sense of the word. You know, what is a computer game classic? Standard answer might be, well, it's whatever game you played when you were a kid. So whatever, you know, was around at that time is obviously a classic. So if you played Nintendo games on whatever, as a kid, you know, then it's all about like Super Mario or something, and that's obviously a classic. Like I, for example, grew up with Macs, so my idea of what a game classic is all of these games from like the early and mid 90s on the Apple Macintosh, like Glider, and all of those Ambrosia software games like Escape Velocity, Harry the Handsome Executive, Pharazal, and so on, which probably no one has actually heard of. Like some of the games which I remember fondly, I literally cannot find any trace of on the internet. I've searched, and like it's not even that there's no like a Madamware version of it. There's literally no page on the internet about these games. Yeah, so what does a classic mean? Easy answer is, well, just whatever you used to play. Another way, another more sophisticated way of saying what is a classic is, well, a classic is a game that has had a huge amount of influence, that is somehow important in the sense of other games as well. And I think in that sense, certainly, Dwarf Fortress is already a classic. It's not that old a game yet. It's still actively developed, but it's definitely a classic because it's just influenced so many games like the ones I mentioned at the start. So, much like, would say, a literary classic, if you really care about games, you sort of want to have played Dwarf Fortress. I'm not saying that you need to like it. It's not super likable in a way, but you need to have at least given it a good try. Watch someone play it for a bit, read a bit about it, or spend some hours playing it yourself, just so you know what it is. It's a bit like saying, like you should, I don't know, if you're really serious about English language literature, you probably need to have read Joyce's Ulysses, which I have not read, but I know is apparently pretty hard going. But again, you don't have to like it, you just have to be aware of it. Okay, so we are here in the screen for selecting a place to place our settlement. Now, the place it's suggesting is actually like right outside some kind of city, which is sort of boring. It does have some metals and stuff, but it has no trees and no vegetation. It's basically put us like in a mountain outside the city. So I don't like that, so I'm just going to use the arrow keys to search around. And actually, it looks a bit like that might be a volcano. Is that a volcano? That'd be nice. No, sweet, you don't. Cat's attempting to knock off the microphone again. Okay, we are now in a sand desert, and yes, there is a volcano, but that's literally all that there is here, so let's not do that to ourselves. Let's pick a sane location, like one with some forest and stuff. Oh, as usual, I've got my iPad at the ready here, so if you have comments or questions or whatever, go ahead and ask them on the chat, and I will read them out and answer them. Oh yeah, I see, that's better. So, okay, no, that's an aquifer. That's just like a bunch of water, will make it hard to dig through. Let's keep searching. I really just want somewhere with some nice forest and like metals and flux-stone. Flux-stone is what you need to make steel, and it's really annoying if you don't have it. There's also a search function which you can use in this. You can just enter some search parameters and it will like figure out the place, but that also takes forever. So I'm currently just eyeballing the world. Oh yeah, oh, that's wonderful. It's cold, admittedly, but it's it has clay, it has soil, it has lots of metal, it has stone, it's heavily forested and so on. That looks like a great place. So yeah, it's a bit cold, but who cares? So let's go and embark in this place. Well, the question is, what are our dwarves gonna be carrying? I personally actually prefer having a really minimum set of stuff. So you have a set of points, and you can use those points on basically giving your dwarf skills. But it gets very complicated organizing this whole thing, because you have far fewer dwarves than there are skills, so you have these complicated skill overlaps and everything. And all in all, I actually kind of prefer basically sending a bunch of completely useless peasants out into the wilderness and kind of building things up from there. So with that in mind, I'm also going to completely nerf what they're carrying. So I'm giving them a pick, I'm giving them an axe to chop down trees with, and I'm giving them an anvil. And that's all. They can, they can make or trade the rest. Oh yeah, you can also name your fortress, which is this wonderful thing wherein you basically compose a dwarfish language expression out of various parts. And then you get the translation as well. You can just hit random a few times. Pale Razors. Yeah, sure. You can also name your people. The Salves of Carnality. Wow, okay. Yeah, the Ancient Furnace. That sounds a little bit more dignified. I don't know why it needs to be dignified, given it's a bunch of peasants with like a minimum amount of tools out in the wilderness, but hey. Okay, so let's start. Yeah, I want to like not use any of my points. Again, you can see slightly minimalist here. The game hasn't crashed. It just doesn't particularly bother with things like progress bars a lot of the time. Okay. Here we are. Isn't it incredibly complicated? Oh yes, oh yes. Right, so I'm just going to talk you through like what you're actually seeing on the screen for a little bit. Right now the screen is subdivided into 3 parts. The part on the right is basically the minimap, where you can see the entire area for our fortress. You can see the yellow X in the center, that's where the view screen is at the moment. And you can see some kind of thing to the right of it that might be our dwarfs, I don't know. Then the screen on the left is basically the detailed actual game view. And what you're seeing there is all of that kind of wavy white stuff is snow. These brown O's and big brown O's, they're probably tree trunks. Then you have all the smiley faces, those are the dwarfs. They're alternating, and the kind of block right in the center is their wagon. And they're blinking back and forth in between some stuff like the little kind of diagonal little slashes. You can see the yellow slashes are going to be their 2 tools. And finally we have like a horse or 2, which is the animals that drew the carriage, which we get for free essentially. Okay, and then the thing in the center is basically the menu that tells us what buttons to press to do various things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to cycle through using tab to this view because I don't really care about the minimap right now. And I've also paused the game, which you just do with space. And now we can have a bit more of a look around. Like the 2 keys which you really want to figure things out are K, which is look, and V, which is view units. And so if I hit K, then I now get this cursor here right in the center, this X, which I can move around with the arrows, and it actually tells me what's going on. Like here's some pebbles covered with snow. Here's a high wood trunk, so this is a big tree trunk, right? Some other tree trunks. If I go over here, so this is the wagon, right? And here we have one of our peasants, another tree trunk, and so on. And here's our horse. So if you don't know what some symbol means, if you're confused, really the thing to do is just to hit space to stop the game, hit K, and then just cursor over the thing which you don't know what it is, and it will tell you. And eventually, long term, you kind of know what most of the common symbols mean. Or you could use a graphical tile set like a sane person. But personally, I actually quite like it like this. It's the whole Matrix joke. You don't see the numbers anymore. You just see blonde, brunette, dwarf, and so on. Okay. So hitting escape to get out there. The other thing that's really useful is V, which is another cursor, and that just shows me the info about the nearest unit, so that's dwarfs or animals or something. You can see you just move around the cursor with the arrow keys, and wherever whichever the closest unit is, kind of blinks with this little green plus, and it gives you information about it. So the point about this UI is that actually it's really quite effective. Like it's quite fast. You just have because you don't need the mouse, you just permanently have your fingers on the keyboard. You just hit single button shortcuts and use the arrow keys to move stuff around. So you can actually be really effective. And it's basically, this thing has a user interface like some kind of air traffic control system built in the 80s or something, where they went like, yeah, we need to have this like high effectiveness user interface for accurately performing some task, right? It's basically an expert UI instead of like a game UI, an expert UI from like the 80s, but whatever. So it's not as horrible as it looks, is basically what I'm saying. But you can see how this is, it is an accessibility nightmare. I mean, you see this and you're just like, oh God, what are all of these things? What do they do? Like there's all of these submenus as well, right? There's so many submenus, like you wouldn't believe how many submenus, especially when you press the button that makes Dwarf Fortress randomly crash. Yeah, then that's particularly bad. Sorry about that. Okay, so that just crashed the game, hitting the building menu, which was unfortunate. So, well, here we are. My guess is that it crashed out because I set the resolution, I scaled the whole UI, and I think it didn't like that very much. I don't think it liked that at all, in fact. But hey, let's just go back to where we were, re-embark. Dwarf Fortress, as I said, is still under active development, so this may not even be quite the newest build. It's constantly changing, it's getting more stuff. Like a few years it made the transition from being two-dimensional to three-dimensional. Oh yeah, that's the other thing worth mentioning. What you saw just there was a single 2D slice out of a massive 3D block of world, which you can get horribly lost in. And now the developers are doing a lot of things with culture and things like that. Like there's like procedural generation of musical instruments and poetic forms is currently being put into the game. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's what I mean in terms of like, this is like, in a sense, this game is beyond anything you see otherwise. You don't get a game that procedurally generates instrument types usually. Because I hope you can still see what's going on. I think in practice I just shouldn't scale the UI for things not to crash. Yeah, no, this time the building submenu worked. Okay. And you can see in a sense that I think a lot of these games, like Towns, like this was one of the early ones, Timber and Stone's another one. All of these games are, I think a lot of them are made by people who love Dwarf Fortress, but are fully aware that like for most people are never going to get into it because it's so forbidding, which is a shame. Okay. So here we are with our few dwarfs and so on. You can see this time we have here a river that's kind of winding its way, and the little blue shapes we have there, they are frozen pools. And we again have a whole bunch of trees of various sizes. Now the way that Dwarf Fortress works is that, again, unlike in say conventional strategy games, you don't select units and tell them what to do. If you try to play Dwarf Fortress from the point of view of something like StarCraft or something, where you click on the unit and tell it to go there, you will go mad because you literally cannot do that. What you do is that you tell the game what you would like to happen, and the dwarves then do it, usually, eventually, when they remember, and so on. One of the weaknesses is definitely that it can get extremely frustrating when you need something done urgently and the dwarves are just like, no, I'm on break, I don't care, that like everything is literally on fire. Or no, I can't be bothered actually healing this guy because I'm like wandering around collecting beetles. This is, the developer's aware of this as well, and like this kind of priority stuff is slowly improving. But turns out that work priority scheduling is a hard problem in the real world too. So hey, okay, so let's start by actually telling these guys to do some stuff. So what we really want to do is A, chop down a whole bunch of trees, and B, make a hole in the ground with our fortress, because we're not going to build like, buildings on those trees that would be positively non-dwarfish. Okay, so how do we do this? We hit D for the designations menu, and now in here we can basically tell the game what we would like to happen. So what we would like to happen is, in fact, it is already selected. We'd like to chop down some trees. Then we move the cursor to, say, here. You can also hold down Shift to move the cursor faster, so that's what I'm going to do. Hit Enter. Ta-da! So I've selected this area, and you can see now that some of the trees there are now highlighted by being inverted, and that means that your dwarves are gonna know that these trees are for chopping down. The other thing which we want to do is to make like a stairs downwards. So let's just pick some area like here. I make a 3x3 area of downward stairs. Now I'm gonna use lesser than and greater than is what you use to navigate through the individual Z layers. So if I use this, I go down by one layer. You can see now we have the underside of the river, so to speak, and of the pools. So I want to go down by one. Then I want to select up down stair. Again. They go up again. So I've basically told them to make a big stairwell down a few floors. And now the other thing is I actually need to tell the dwarves what their jobs are. Like if I hadn't made them all peasants, then they'd actually already have some jobs pre-selected, but because they're all peasants and hence don't know anything, they don't have anything enabled. This is another one of those wonderful things where, like, if you get into Dwarf Fortress, you try to play it and like, why aren't my dwarfs doing anything? I taught them to do this. The answer might be you don't have a dwarf that's actually set to do this sort of job. So to do this, we can go into our unit list, say, pick just say the first dwarf. Then, no, that's the wrong button. Here, this guy, or gal, and then we go into preferences, labor, and we say that she's a minor now. Awesome. Okay, second one in here. Again, we go to the unit. We say this one does wood cutting, so they'll be responsible for actually cutting down those trees with the axe. And then the next two, we're just going to say, you guys, we set you to plant gathering. So in these menus, you go up and down with the plus and minus keys rather than with the arrow keys. Why? Because you're already using the arrow keys for the cursor. Oh God, right. User interface. Again, really fast once you know how to use it. Completely impossible to get into without like reading a whole bunch of tutorials and so on. And you can kind of see how a game developer might play this and get this deep itching where they're like, this is a great game. If I could just make it more accessible, and that's where all of these new games come from. The question is kind of, can you make it more accessible without destroying its depth? And to what degree have they managed to do that? And that's sort of a difficult question. Most of the games that try to make a more accessible Dwarf Fortress focus kind of on the core gameplay of, you know, building stuff with some little people, with often some kind of indirect command system, and like resource management and so on. That's obviously there, but the point is that really Dwarf Fortress is it's a simulator. It simulates an entire world in which your dwarves happen to be. And like your dwarves have they have culture and stories and friendships and a huge number of interactions, and like the geology of the world is kind of semi-accurate. You have dozens of kinds of stone and so on. You've got all of this depth, all of this world that tends to be simplified down a lot by Dwarf Fortress imitators. Understandably, because it took a lot of effort to build in the first place. Okay, so I'm going to tell this one as well to gather plants. And then, of course, we need to, the other way around, going to designate, choose gather plants, and then we're going to say, hey, just like, you know, this huge area, just rip out anything plant-like and potentially edible, you see, because, of course, we didn't bring any food, so it would be quite good to have some food, wouldn't it? And now, the other thing which we need to do is that, now I told these people to harvest wood and food, we need them to put it somewhere. And to do that, we need to hit P for designating storage piles. We're going to hit F for food storage pile, and we're going to say, hey, near the entrance, like this is going to be a food storage pile, and then wood. This is going to be a storage pile for wood. Okay, now we're actually done. We've taught them who does what, we've taught them what to do, and we've taught them where to move the resulting products. So we can hit space, and our dwarfs spring into action. You can see they grab stuff, and they start harvesting plants, they start felling trees, and you can see that, hey, the little areas here are filling up with wood. And the other people who I didn't tell anything particular to do, they're actually busying themselves with moving the wood around, because even if they don't have any other thing enabled, they still default to moving things around if they need moving around. So again, this is all based on this kind of what needs doing point of view. Meanwhile, we are digging down. We've got a message saying that we have struck sardonyx, which I think is some kind of... Okay, so like, what's this yellow stuff? I hit K, I go, okay, this yellow stuff is loamy sand. And then we have fire clay, silty clay. Now we have claystone with some sardonyx in it. Okay, so a little while after that, we basically end up with actual stone. So let's add another up-down stair at this level, where hopefully we will be firmly in like stone rather than like clay. Okay, so our people are gathering food, a whole bunch of trees have been felled, we now have a lot of wood, so now we need to do some stuff with this wood. And to do that, we need to grab another dwarf who's not yet set to do anything, actually this one, because, and we tell him also do carpentry. Now, in order to do carpentry, we need to build a building, namely a carpeting workshop. And we're going to plonk it down right next to all of the wood. And now it asks us, what do you want to make this stuff out of? So you can make different buildings out of different materials, which is another one of those like weird bits of complexity. But it's kind of cool. Yeah, let's just make it out of nearby pine logs, that's fine. And we'll want to make another storage pile for furniture, which we're going to make with this, and finished goods, which we might also end up making. And actually the other kind of work which we want to start doing, which I guess this guy can do, is we want to do some masonry. Hopefully we'll get a few blocks of stone soon from the mining, and then we can turn this into stuff. And again, for that, of course, we need a mason's workshop, which we're going to plop down, say here. I'll make it out of claystone, yeah. Okay, hit resume, and you can see the dwarfs again spring into action and do stuff. You can see how many dwarfs are not doing anything by looking at the number of idlers at the top right. I hate this because I'm a weird perfectionist, and it drives me mad if like number of idlers is higher than like 1. Then I have to start fiddling with assignments. This is bad, actually. Okay, they've gathered all the plants in that area, so I'm just going to tell them to gather more plants. Plants, there. Okay, and we've got a carpenter here. And now the very first thing we need is a whole bunch of barrels. Why do we need barrels? Well, barrels is what you store food and also booze in, and our dwarfs love booze. So let's go down here, and indeed we've now got some basic kind of shaft, and now we can branch off there and start making some underground rooms. So to do this, I again hit designate, and I use the mine tool to say, well, build this corridor here with like this room here branching off, and like this room here branching off. Why not? Actually don't need this corridor here yet. Let's just make a little weirdly long shaped set of 2 rooms. We're gonna be able to start putting some beds into it and things like that in a bit. So hit resume, and in a moment you can see this. The entrance here has started blinking yellow, which indicates that yeah, someone's now chosen it as the target for their thing. And you can see these dwarves, even though this guy is like Gal is new at the whole mining thing, they're absurdly fast. Like they can like clear several cubic meters of stone more quickly than they can chop down a tree. Realism, whatever, dwarves. Okay, so now we also have this here mason's workshop, and from the mason what we really want is we want 2 doors, one for each of our building, each of our room entrances, and we will then want a table and like 3 thrones, and that's going to be what we use to furnish our kind of first meeting hall. So the dwarves will have somewhere to like gather and eat and drink. Like many such games, like dwarves have emotional states and needs. So if you make them unhappy, they will eventually like flip out and murder each other. And one good way of making sure that they aren't too unhappy is to give them like places to socialize and eat and drink and so on. That's like a basic thing. So here our barrels are being produced. That's those little division signs here. Our doors are being produced. That's those little pluses. So now we've got that. The next thing we also need urgently is someone to brew things. If we go into farming related stuff, we hit brewing. Now why is brewing so important? 2 reasons. One, beer, right, booze, whatever. The dwarves love it, the dwarves need it, they get extremely cranky if they don't have it. Reason number 2 is really weird. Dwarves tend to eat fruit and so on with their seeds, which means that there are no seeds to plant. But if you brew things, the brewing process actually removes the seeds from the plants before they get brewed. And so brewing is a really great way of easily making sure that all the plants I've just harvested get turned into a useful product, but I get to keep the seeds and I get to plant the seeds. So yeah, brewing. This is another one of those little deeds, right? So we set this person to brewing. Now we need, of course, another workshop, which is a still. Let's put that right here next to the food. Make it out some wood logs. And continue. So this one, so like whatever job someone has, they then gain the ability to actually build the related building. So they're still here. So I'm just going to say, hey, you know, basically, oh God. Apparently we don't have anything brewable yet. It's just annoying. You can extract something from plants. Just told them to do a bunch of times. Okay, I'm just curious what we can extract from those plants. I'm also extremely curious what food, if any, we actually gathered. So to figure that out, we hit K, we go into the still, and here we have large barrel number 1. And I think you can hit enter here. And it's, I think, literally empty. Guys, did you like not find any actual food? But this is going to be fun. Usually, yeah, alfalfa. That's food. Fisher berries, that's food. Gather those plants, like fisher berries can be turned into wine. Gather them already. We need food. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So one of the weird things about Dwarf Fortress is that, like I said, it's a hard game. It has a reputation as an extremely hard game. But actually, I think that's not really true. The game itself is extremely forgiving. These dwarves have been working tirelessly with no drink, like literally all the water's frozen, and no food. And they've already built all this stuff, they've hollowed out this stuff, and they can keep going for quite a long while before they even get cranky from a lack of food. You know, and in a fully functioning fortress, like maybe like, I don't know, like 1 out of 10 people, I guess, need to be really involved in food production. The others are like free to do whatever else. And this is insane. Like, there is no society on earth where, like, you know, like even in like a modern developed nation, it's more than 10% in agriculture once you take into account food imports. Like, this is not how medieval agriculture works. This is not how food works. Like 90% of your dwarves ought to be, or at least like half or something, ought to be busy like getting enough food so people don't starve. But here, that's fine, whatever. Okay, now they're getting thirsty. That is a bit of a problem. What might work is I might be able to tell my digger to dig a channel into one of those. No, all the water's still frozen solid. Okay, never mind. Yeah, we're just gonna have to wait until like spring and hopefully not die of thirst. Like this may fail, but it often literally works. So the point is, the game, in terms of how painful the world is, unless you like really screw yourself over by like embarking in like a area full of monsters, it's much nicer than the real world. And what's actually hard about Dwarf Fortress is the user interface. That's hard. Okay, so there are trees bearing berries up here, but I doubt they are currently bearing any berries. Bear. Oh well, let's try to not die here. Okay, so this whole thing is a bit of a problem with the lack of drink. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm just going to try and... Oh, fine, okay, come on, brew drinks from plants, yes. Just brew those drinks, Mr. Brewer. You can do it. Because if you can brew things, then we can, like, not, you know, die. Don't think too hard about why drinking, like, wine quenches thirst effectively. These are dwarves. Okay, we've got our two initial like little areas down here. So now we're gonna build some stuff here, and specifically we're gonna build a table here with some chairs around it, and that will be our kind of initial meeting hall. Which reminds me, we also really need from Mr. Carpenter at least some beds. And you, Mr. Mason, well... No, don't build an armor stand. That was exactly the wrong thing to do. Cancel that. Build some more doors. Okay. Yeah, so again, the unemployed dwarfs automatically haul stuff around. Oh, another detail is like horses might get hungry. So we should put them out into a pasture, which we can do by specifying a zone. A zone is different from a building or a stockpile. I don't actually know why, but it is. So we use the zones menu, which uses a slightly different UI than like say stockpiles, because you need to specify the area first and then the type to like declare this to be a pasture and to put the horses into it. Yay! I mean, it's kind of nominal. It just means like the horses are no longer like tied up next to the cart, because they will eventually starve to death as well. Yeah, so our dwarfs are still thirsty. You can see that because they keep on alternating with little blue downwards arrows. But now we're actually brewing some drinks. So it is my great hope eventually they will not be so thirsty anymore. Okay, so this miner is currently bored. Well, if the miner's bored, that's fairly easy. We've got like a first set of two initial kind of generic rooms here. So the next thing we really want to do is we want to have some big halls of industry. So let's make a big tunnel off here. Just like, yeah. I'm mostly just telling the miner to do this so they can produce more stone and have something to do. So yeah, the three-dimensionality of Dwarf Fortress, the fact that everything is essentially a set of fat voxels, is, you know, amongst other things, kind of one of the inspirations in Minecraft. And both games share their kind of ability to really interact and change the world, because the world is just made out of these discrete blocks. Like most games try really hard to have all of these systems, all of these kind of concepts that are sort of baked into the world. Like, you know, the game has a concept of a house, and that's like the primary unit, like, is a house. Minecraft doesn't have an idea of house. It has an idea of individual blocks. They can arrange those blocks in the shape of a house, and then it's a house, I guess. It doesn't, you know, there's nothing in there really saying, oh, it's a house. And that gives you this huge amount of freedom to do all kinds of cool stuff, basically by stepping away from caring so much about what things are and just kind of looking into how things behave. Dwarf Fortress tries very hard to sort of straddle this divide, which is also where a lot of its most confusing elements come from, like the fact that I have to like specify a zone or stockpile, and you'll see in a moment, or like a special building and so on, is all down to the fact that the world is made out of blocks, but the dwarves really care about like buildings and zones and so on. So they have these concepts of house, or similar to house, but the world doesn't. It just has a concept of block. And the way Dwarf Fortress fixes this is by basically saying to you as the player that it's your job to explain to the dwarves, oh, by the way, this is a meeting hall. So if we go down here, we can now see here's a whole bunch of here's now a table and 3 thrones. Now if we hit, oh god, Q is the command for looking at buildings. Now building is a really weird, vague concept in Dwarf Fortress. It really means anything that's kind of been constructed and placed down. So a workshop is a building, but so is a single table. So we're going to go to this table here, and we're going to say, dear table, become a dining room. So because tables are something that you would expect to have in a dining room, you can go to the table and you can tell it, because you are here, please make the entire area around you into a dining room. So we make this jump from it's a table, like it's a, you know, just a table-shaped object, to this entire area around it is the dining room with everything that entails in terms of like food is eaten there, the dwarves congregate here, their pets congregate here, and so on. And you're essentially asked as the human to imbue, click, these things with meaning. And we're going to say it's a meeting hall. So you make that jump. You say, well, this was just a set of blocks, but now it's actually a dining room. And the dwarves take that up and actually know, okay, now we're going to eat there. And that, in a sense, gives us the best of both worlds. Like, okay, in practice, you end up building kind of room-shaped rooms just because they're practical, and also because the 2D user interface is a bit hard to navigate. There's nothing stopping you from making some kind of weird honeycomb of like weird passages and odd kind of shapes and whatnot. I mean, some stuff you can, you know, some stuff you can see in like Minecraft. You get this kind of wonderfully weird abstract architecture and stuff like that, that maybe our eyes can still identify as, say, a building or something, or maybe we're completely bewildered by it and see it as sculpture or whatever. But that's fine, because there aren't any, like, there are a few, but not really, kind of clever NPCs in in Minecraft, it's people, so people make up their own meanings. Here, it's the dwarves, and you have to kind of help the dwarves make that jump. From this is like an area which is enclosed, and it has a table in it. Well, this is actually a dining room. And now we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to build a bunch of beds. By build, I really mean place, because we already built the beds. We just need to say, hey, here they are now. Put them here, please. And we're going to make a dormitory. So one really interesting question is, could you make a game a little bit like... so you could look at this from two directions. You could make a game that's sort of like Dwarf Fortress, but instead of choosing the particular shapes of everything at a low level and then telling the dwarves the connections, like I'm going to do here, make this into a bedroom, and yes, it's a dormitory. So instead of doing this, I could just say build a dormitory here, and the dwarves would actually go and they would figure stuff out, and they would you know, build the beds, and they would like make an area, a cave in the rock and so on, and they turn it into a dormitory. So the dwarfs would essentially decide what the dormitory is exactly. Of course, the question is at this point, why do you have all of this complexity with all the tiles? We're back to a kind of more standard building up strategy game where you just like, you know, build a barracks, and it gives you, and you build a barracks in a particular location, and the barrack has no more complexity than, oh, it's a building of this type. The other way around would be, well, you could kind of have the dwarves make these decisions automatically. I mean, they could figure out, hey, this is a room that has got some stuff in it. This would be a good dining hall. It's got all the right stuff for dining hall. And they'd just start using it as a dining hall because it's dining hall shaped. That would be cool, but it would be incredibly frustrating because, like, it's, you know, it's going to be a heuristic. And this heuristic is going to mess up constantly. Like, you're going to build, like, what you think is this beautiful stables, and the dwarves, based on some heuristics, are going to decide that this is, like, actually a great plant nursery. And you're like, but that's not what I mean. Like, yeah, so how do you, you know, if the dwarves are not, after all, really people, they're computer programs, and they're not so good, even with the best, very clever fine-tuned heuristics, not so good at being able to look at something, understand its shape, and kind of figure out what it might be for. That's a pretty human trait. And yeah, sure, you know, give me 10 years and like a research team of AI researchers, I can probably make you something. But, you know, why? That's not the same way of developing games. So I think Dwarf Fortress is kind of at this interesting point where it gives you the ability to have this complex world and really interact with it at this fine-grained level. By, for example, harvesting even more plants, harvest all the plants. No more plants. Plants, come on, there must be some plants somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, it lets you interact with them at this fine-grained level, and it lets you build these arbitrary shapes. And that's really cool. Like, one thing that's also really cool is later on when you get to fighting, when you get to sieges and so on, Dwarf Fortress doesn't entirely succeed, but somewhat succeeds in that, like, your fortress actually has a particular shape because it makes sense to have that sort of shape. Like, you want to hold off invaders, well, you better build some tall walls. Why? Because walls are actually just hard to traverse. You build some arrow slits because that gives you a good firing angle. And that's not because, like, in most games, like, you know, you build, like, let's build a tower with some cannons on, and the tower with cannons on is really just a unit with some hit points, and it does some damage per turn or something, and that's why it's good, you know. In Dwarf Fortress, like, if you build a tower with like catapults on or something, it's good because it's good that it's a tower because that makes it hard to reach and gives a good vantage point, and the catapult then does damage, but you can't just put a catapult out on the field, it will just get destroyed and so on. So the point is the shape of things actually matters in the game because the game simulation, the game world is intricate enough to make it matter. Okay, I think we are heading towards spring. What do we want to do? Well, we want to make more booze, more booze, more booze, more booze. Also a few bins, which other things are stored in, but mostly more booze. Because we can, like everything else, we can somehow survive, but running out of alcohol would be the worst thing of all. We've made some doors, that's good. A little bit, we'll make more beds and start giving these people individual areas. One thing we haven't found yet is any kind of metal. So we're going to want to dig deeper. We've got some stone, we've got some lovely gems, we don't have any metal. I have one idler. Why are you idle? Because you're not assigned to do anything. Okay, well you, dwarf, who's not assigned to do anything, you've just been selected to do stone crafting. So we're going to make trinkets out of stone, so we can then sell these trinkets to passing traders. And that's essentially how we're going to like get a whole bunch of other things. We're going to trade with like dwarven caravans for like all of the various products we can't get here locally. So we want to say we made rock crafts, and we just want to do this endless repeat. So I've just sentenced this dwarf to a life sentence of sitting there and making mugs out of rock. Yeah, sorry about that, but it's for the good of the fortress. So where were we? Yeah, philosophizing about like, you know, the fungibility of something like Dwarf Fortress or something like Minecraft. And I really think that this is a direction which, like the sheer degree to which you can affect the world and change the world, all of this stuff that just sort of works in Dwarf Fortress. Like you want to drown your enemies in lava with like pumps that make the lava, get the lava up from like underground, and then you have a lava moat that you can activate with a switch or something. Well, yeah, you can do that. But again, you don't build a lava moat unit. You just like, you know, engineer a set of things with pumps that pump the lava and so on. And you can do that, you know, you can do something like that in Minecraft as well. But even Minecraft is more limited. Like they kind of backed away from the whole proper physics simulation thing when, because it has an infinite world, they could never get water and so on working correctly. So water doesn't really behave properly. You can't pump it around. It's, you know, infinite in a certain sense. You can just take a water unit and place it somewhere and it kind of spits out some water, but you know, whereas in Dwarf Fortress, water is like a known quantity. Like you can pump it around, you can move it around. When you've moved it, it's gone. Sometimes comes down from the sky to replenish and so on. So you want to pump around some water. You want to have a system for pumping water on fields. You want to like, you know, do weird projects. I remember reading this one about guy who discovered that the local mermaids, their skeleton was considered to be very high in trade value, and so he wanted to make crafts from these mermaid skeletons. How to catch the mermaids? Well, the answer is make a huge enclosed kind of bit of ocean and then have a system to be able to drain the entire bit of ocean, so then the mermaids would get to the bottom and they would asphyxiate, and then the mermaid skulls could be collected and turned into cups. And then like it switch another switch and this bit would open up again, will fill up again, and eventually the mermaids would swim in again. So he built this like insane murderous mermaid trap of death for trade goods, which is, you know, quite wonderfully mad science. But, you know, Zach and Tal Adams, the developers, didn't sit down and say, we need to have mermaid traps as a unit, as a building. They just made a thing that is a world that lets you do these sorts of things. And that's ultimately what I love about Dwarf Fortress, that you can make stuff like that. It is so deep. It has sufficiently realistic interactions by and large that if you go, I wonder if you could make a device that does X, Y, Z, you can sort of imagine it in your head as if it was real, and then you can pretty much make it like that. And other games really shy away from that. And in fact, I think one of the things that's sort of weird is that when you get people pushing, well, what should the future of games look like? What some interesting directions that games should go? somehow it's always in the direction of different forms of storytelling. Like, you just get people standing around there and insisting loudly that games are a storytelling medium, like cinema or novels or something. And like, I find that really weird. I mean, yes, sure, you can use it for that, but it's not specifically a storytelling medium. It's not. It can be a story creation and experiencing medium as well. Like the story of this little fortress as it's kind of starting, the bit where they nearly ran out of water, but then they made some like wine out of local berries, and so on. That story, which is just beginning here, that story wasn't like carefully planned out. Like Zach and Tarn Adams aren't telling me this story. They have made a program that creates these stories, that involves me in these stories, and that goes beyond what a book or a film or something can do. It's not. It goes beyond some kind of lazy storytelling game thing where like, oh look, every once in a while we'll give you like a binary decision as to which path to go down. Because that's still storytelling. Choose your own adventure, even if it's clever, is still storytelling. What's cool is simulation, is creating a world that reacts to the player, that is deep enough so that when the player does something, things happen. And the story, a tale, whatever, an experience evolves out of that. And I really think that for all of that pushing for more sophisticated storytelling, which I do welcome as well, for all of that pushing for, storytelling that goes beyond all evil aliens turned out must shoot evil aliens, not that many games even do that anymore, for all the criticism of how that's boring and how we should move beyond that, I think moving beyond that by just trying to make games more like novels or more like art movies or something, that's in a sense that's just moving away from what games can do. What games can do is this. What games can do is have these worlds, and that's why Minecraft is so successful. That's why Dwarf Fortress is so amazing, even though it's doomed to be a niche game. And I would much rather try to work on games which try to push these sorts of worlds forward, and like really these worlds, these real worlds. We're not talking about something like an MMO, which is just full of content which you consume. People will call that a world, but again, the MMO is it's not a place. It doesn't have interactions. If you go and kill the spiders will just respawn for the next instance. And okay, sometimes there'll be a few triggers and you can like change something large scale, but it's not just having a whole bunch of content and having a few nods to, oh, you can change the world by basically flipping some flags or changing some value. That isn't the real world. That's just a slightly more sophisticated kind of theatre backdrop. And I would like to see games which aren't made of theatre backdrop, which have this kind of depth that is here in Dwarf Fortress, which is deep enough to really involve the player and really react to what people are doing. Okay, so anyway, having completed this round and having reached just about 1 hour, I think I have roughly said the thing which I really wanted to say about Dwarf Fortress. I haven't played all that much of it, but you can see maybe a little bit how you might get along. If you want to try it, it's, just search for Dwarf Fortress. It's free, it's available for all kinds of operating systems, and you can totally learn how to play it. Read the wiki. Watch some more Let's Plays, maybe use a graphical tile set, and so on. There's like packages. If you go onto the forums, there's people who've made these wonderful packages that include Dwarf Fortress and like with tile sets pre-installed, so you don't need to fiddle anything with the configuration. And it's worth playing this for a while and just experiencing how a game that isn't just made out of kind of stage dressing looks like, how a world looks like in a computer, rather than just a story with a bit of interactivity thrown in. Okay, so that's me done. I will return tomorrow, probably, with some game development on airships. I will be away from the 2nd until the 6th of October. I'm actually going on holiday, which is new, but I will be back after that. Okay, well, thank you for listening, and goodbye for now.